In the third episode of Parents and Teens, we learn three or four very obvious things, or things that could be obvious to most parents. One is that how different children actually adapt differently to the same family environment. Another thing we can notice is that parents' expectations often are very high, but unless we are careful in terms of how we communicate them, we might find one child who becomes fairly rigid in terms of doing everything exactly right. We might find another child who's just simply anxious, and then we find, strangest of all, a child who lives a double life where ostensibly or on the surface he is somewhat disobedient, but privately is actually a high achiever like he thinks the parents want. It's an interesting case, and these two parents are very clear in their descriptions of their children and what they hope for their children. Hi, today on Parents and Teens, we are talking with the father and mother about three of their adolescent children, two boys and a girl. One is 17, 16, the two boys, and then the girl is 14. I want to welcome you both to this program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a tradition of inviting you to describe your children and your family so that you can say whatever you'd like, and the listeners can get some idea about the context or the setting of your family and a little bit about what your children are like. So would you please take a turn and tell us whatever you'd like about your kids?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, we're a two-parent family. We actually have 5 children, but for the sake of the Teens podcast, we just prepared to talk about 3 of them. So depending on what time will allow for. Just starting with the oldest, 17-year-old. To describe his personality, I guess, he's fairly driven and goal-oriented, and very ambitious, I would say, or conscientious maybe about doing the right thing. And along with that, we feel that he kind of struggles with a fear of failing or not being productive, or a fear of disappointing others. Mostly what we're hoping to get help with on this is he seems to have really a lot of difficulty tolerating other people. So tolerating family members and just feeling happy with himself. I think there's a lack of enjoyment that I don't know if it could be diagnosed as a mild depression, or just if that's normal for a teenager his age. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, there is always a sense of impatience, especially when something he feels like is a waste of his time. Whether it's school or an activity with friends or hanging out with the family, he can be incredibly impatient. If we're gathering around to have a family conversation, and the other children are just kind of, bumbling in the normal fashion, he gets tense about that.
Does he voice his irritation or frustration sometimes?
Oh,
in
yeah.
Your family toward them?
Yeah, sometimes we'll identify it for him, and he's like, "You seem impatient or upset about something," and I'm waiting for everybody to show up, and.
But there's also a guilt factor because he will apologize for his behavior once he realizes he's out of line. So I think that's a double-edged sword for him, because that also causes him further unhappiness, is feeling guilty about his reaction to people.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that's your oldest. What's your next son like?
So his brother is 16. He's actually only 15 months younger. And we've wondered a lot about just the sibling dynamic being an influential factor in our 16-year-old's, I guess, personality or his approach.
Kind of a reactionary the first brother, the older brother is
Seems
very successful in a lot of outwardly ways, good grades, and things like that. But this one is almost reluctant to
try.
try to achieve things. Maybe because he's afraid of that comparison, or he's afraid that he will fail, and then that comparison will come into play. I don't know. He lacks some vision about who he is, I think, and his own place and value, and we should try.
So you're seeing some insecurity in him.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
But he's definitely a lot more able to enjoy people. He's a lot more easygoing because he doesn't have that same, oh, I've got to accomplish things, so I'm just not even going to bother, so I'll just be happy sort of thing.
he's more gregarious with other people, particularly people younger than him. You know,
And you're thinking he's a little more extreme in that way than he would be because his older brother is so motivated and so on.
I just wouldn't be surprised. I don't know. I mean, they're at the same high school. They attend all the same church activities. I mean, they can't go anywhere without the comparison being made, either if it's spoken or not spoken.
people from a distance sometimes would think they were twins or something, and they're not.
Well, people at school cannot tell them apart. So, yeah.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, and then your daughter, please.
Okay, yeah. So she's actually 13. She has a great sense of humor. She's fun for us to be around. Have good. She carries a lot of social trepidation, and we actually made a big move. We moved our family right at a time when she was just entering adolescence, and that was really, really difficult for her. So she has a lot of just social, I don't know, awkwardness.
Well, I mean, she left behind some friends that were well matched for her, and now we're in a community where it's people her age are fewer and farther between. Our neighborhood is an older neighborhood, but that's part of it.
That's part of it, but also, I guess the bigger question on my mind is just that she gets easily overwhelmed by anything, just routine tasks, and any expectation of her to take responsibility for homework or chores or just anything that is inconvenient or uncomfortable. The reaction that ensues really on a regular basis is very negative. There's a lot of
emotion.
A lot of negative emotion, and we would love to be able to help her through that.
And or be more positive.
Right.
Calm and confident. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you want to proceed? Do you want to talk about each one at a time and then move to the next and so on? Would that be all right with you?
Sure.
Okay. Now, we sent you some documentation inviting you to prepare some questions. If you have those prepared, now would be a good time. And if you didn't have a chance to do that, then whatever questions you like. And so let's start with your oldest son and see what happens, what turns up.
Sure, we did try to come as prepared as possible. So you had asked us to describe our relationships with him, and with my oldest son, I feel particularly keenly the, I guess, lack of affection and openness that I wish for. And I also feel we both feel a lot of insecurities around each other. So I would describe just the mother-son relationship as superficial, polite, but defensive, and also guilty. So I think we feel sort of a family guilt about, like, I feel awkward around you and I feel guilty about it. And also there's like absolutely no physical affection. So that kind of bothers me, but how would you describe your relationship with him?
I think he and I have some fairly, he's definitely more mature oriented. He thinks about um, much more mature ideas than probably a lot of other teenagers have in the past, or maybe I would have at his age. And he and I will often have those conversations. I'll be working on my computer, and he'll just kind of glide in like a ghost and just sit down nearby, and then I'll turn and say, "Oh, hey, how are you doing? You want to talk about something?" And it's like, it's just coming to check up on you or whatever, and we'll have a conversation. I'll create it though. I'm the one that creates that conversation.
And he
All right,
has,
Ned, do you have a question about that?
yeah. So I guess the overarching question is how for us to help him find a sense of genuine happiness and just the ability to be open and enjoy others.
Okay, because your thinking is a little too tense or stressed, and lacks an ability to deal with, say, relational kinds of experiences, especially with you as mother.
Yeah, he's very defensive with me.
He's high strung, I think is the phrase that some people might use.
Well, I would take a look at the following things in a way to answer that question. Sometimes when parents have their own history of achievement, for example, children, especially oldest children, will look around and think, all right, my parents are loading up on me. Whatever they value, whatever they want that they believe is important, they pour into the oldest child, believing that if they can get the oldest child to function well, then the other kids will have an example to follow. So sometimes we'll create from your example as individuals who achieve, and the messages that you may send about what's important. In our particular culture, you may give a lot of, I've got to be productive in order to be a successful family member. Get things done, be organized, and so on. And very intelligent kids will catch on to that early. And so they'll emphasize, grades at school or other approved areas, but then they won't perhaps spend the time or know how important it is to maintain the emotional tie that comes from relationship experiences. So that's one thing I would take a look at. Here's another one, is that sometimes males in our society privatize themselves when they get into adolescence in order to achieve a form of independence. So they sometimes won't talk to a parent about their personal things, and the parent will think maybe that they're withdrawing or rejecting, but mostly that's just, I'm going to keep my confidence myself. I'm not going to talk to people, and so I can make my own decisions. Now, if your question is how do you correct that, see, then here would be my answer to that. I believe that it would be important for you to develop an overall kind of an umbrella concept of what you would like to see in his life. I'll give you an example. You could say, successful people have two parts of their lives, two paths. They can achieve and they can be productive and so on, but they also are very successful with people, a variety of kinds of people. And if one's missing, then they lack something. They lack the fulfillment from relational experiences, or you might get an individual who does really well at college, gets very high grades, achieves really well, but has a hard time at work because there's coworkers or there's other people. Some of those individuals will choose careers where the contact with other people is minimal, for that reason, because they're not comfortable. The problem is that in order to be happily married and to be parents and to be successful in communities, good relational skills are important. So I would propose that you create some kind of a rubric like that or an overall message, and then say to him, because of your age, we think that we ought to just participate with you in doing something to improve our relationship and to improve your ability to be successful. Then what you do is collect some information from him about how he sees himself in each of those areas, and then create some form of an ongoing kind of experience. And in the doing of that, address this notion. Two, he might be wound up really tight about the idea that there's a right and a right and a wrong and a right and a wrong. And while that's a good thing about some moral issues, it's not a great thing about things that aren't. So, for example, kids who were really tense about doing the right thing treat situations that are conventional like moral situations, like whether or not it's wrong to wear opposite stockings to school. Say, well, it's not a moral issue, but they think it is. They behave in that way. And they often worry excessively about what other people think, see, because they're monitoring whether or not they're approved of or disapproved of. So while you've got the overall umbrella going, you say, we'd like you to take a look at the fact that there are some things that are more absolute than others. And you divide those and say, here are some things that we think are really definite and so on. And then here's some things we think there are many opinions. And so we would like, as part of helping you be successful, to have you come up with the idea that you should observe somebody and get 2 or 3 interpretation of that person's behavior, see, before you pass a judgment about it. So you develop that in your relationship with him, and you ask him to do the same thing. And then you may want to introduce the ability to meet new people and learn to accept people who offer a variety or diverse kinds of experiences, males and females, older and younger, and ask him to begin to show what is called learning about people and then accepting without judgment, or accepting before judgment, and have him apply that in your family. Now, you could also actively teach those concepts in your home if you wanted to. You say, here's how we want people to be treated, and here's how we're doing it, and so on. So then you teach him to look for more than one explanation. And then you also invite him to get really good at some specific social skills. You probably know what they are, learning to learn about people, learning to accept people who are different than you, and then have him address something. The problem you'll run into, that I suspect that he probably is very literal about what he hears from you, and believes that if he hears it, he should implement it in a certain way. And so you need to talk to him about inviting him to take 2 or 3 different looks at what you tell him and say, how would you interpret that? How would you apply this? So that you invite him to do the same thing. And that might help loosen him just a little, so he's a little more flexible and adaptable. And then the second suggestion I'd make is take a look at the idea of adaptation and help him identify what a situation is, like what are the rules, who are the people, and what you're supposed to do in that situation, and have him learn to apply that to people in an elevator, people at school, people at church, people in the family, and then teach him to adapt differently to each of those situations. See, how do you deal with people in an elevator? How's that different than people at home? How's that different than people? So that he learns to make adjustments in his understanding of the rules and the understanding of the relational behavior with people. And that'll help him learn to be more flexible, I think.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I had never considered, the idea of having him or requesting him to try to come up with 2 or 3 different interpretations. His interpretation is always very rigid. Yeah, so that's great.
Well, when you work hard to try to be right, there's an anxiety component in your life, and you do that to compensate for anxiety. I've got to get the right interpretation. I've got to do this exactly so. And so what we're trying to do is to help reduce the tension that he feels by allowing him to see things from several different perspectives. And I can remember in my own life when I learned that it would be a good idea, for example, to see the world instead of just a right or a wrong, to discover that there's more than one good, and to hunt for the goods on every decision instead of think of my world in terms of just those two options. Made my life a whole lot better. Okay, let's talk about child number 2 then for a few minutes. What are your questions there?
Child number 2, probably the thing about him is we want him to be able to, and we had a little conversation about this the other day, where he gets extremely motivated to play video games. That's a good example, and so he will do everything very quickly, usually at the bare minimum or whatever that gets it done, and he does it usually with some cheerfulness, but the thing that seems to be missing is is a vision for himself of what he can become. There's something missing there where we worry about maybe his own vision of his self-worth and the reality of how powerful and smart and lovable he is in a lot of situations.
Yeah, he doesn't see that about himself currently, and I think he doesn't tend to, we brought it up with him several times. What kind of things can you look towards for yourself in the future? What would you like to create for yourself in the future? So that's sort of our overarching question, is just helping him to find a clear vision for his own future and something that he will want to latch onto and work towards, not feel like it's something that there's a social or parental expectation for him to work towards this, because we already know that that's not going to bear any weight with him.
I mean, we put him in, even as a young child, we put him in karate classes, and he's just like, yeah, I did it. And then he's like, I don't want to continue. Or we put him on a soccer team, and he sits down and
he was meditating on the soccer field.
Meditate instead of whatever and so there is a.
But then he ate the treats afterwards, so that's
absolutely
made it worthwhile.
Treats are there for all.
Okay, could I ask you a question just for a minute? How definite are you about the stuff you believe in your own personal lives? For example, if I walked into your office, your home office, is your desk clean with very few papers on it? Is your room typically organized, or is your desk a mess, and so on? How precise would the two of you be about your own lives? Would you tell me that?
Well, I am happy to talk about my desk. My desk is not clean. It is organized in its own way, if you will. Like layers of archaeology, I can get to the things that I know, what meeting I had when, and when somebody moves something, it makes it harder for me to find it. But and I think the same can be said in different places where I have to go back and try to reassert some sort of order. That's a pretty normal. But how precise am I in my life about some things? I'm very precise about some things, but my desk is not that place.
So I just happened to pick a good example.
That's an excellent example. It is right over there. I'm looking at it right now, and my wife is giggling about it.
It's not so bad, actually, right now.
Well, okay, but in your language where you're describing this, your language is really quite well defined. There's not a lot of hesitation, about maybe, and so on. So, which is not a bad thing. But in your lives, in your example that you said for him, it seems to me you probably would communicate, which is a good thing, in my opinion, something that's pretty well defined and so on. And what he's doing is engaging in some mild form of oppositional behavior where he is not going to be like that. And it wouldn't surprise me if that in your case is a form of non-ignorable behavior to you. So that when he does that, it draws a lot of attention or involvement. So for example, if you're in a situation where you wanted everything to be in order, he would provide disorder. See, or
you're very good at this, because I'm thinking of more than one example right now, where
his attention-seeking behavior.
Yeah, we were at an activity and there are chairs enough for everyone, and he chooses to sit on the floor and kind of, or he resisted piano lessons, but now he knows how to play the piano. And if there's a piano in the room, everybody could be having a conversation. He'll sit down at the piano and jam out a little, or it's if it's close by. I don't think he would walk through the middle of the people to do it. But there's that for sure.
So, but your question appears to be that you would like him to be able to actually participate and do what others do, or what would be appropriate for a situation without him feeling obligated to be contrary, or to come up with something that's so diverse that it's noticed. Have you ever invited him to do this for a period of time? Have you ever said to him, look, we're going to have a family activity and we'd like you to not do what other people do, for an hour or two? And so that you put his behavior under your direction and see.
I don't know if he wouldn't know what to do in that case. I think he would be very confused.
I don't know. I think he would enjoy it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people have an identity based on what other people are not. And in some ways, that's quite a good thing. We'd like him to not be a criminal, and to not use chemicals, inappropriately. And so he has a bunch of that. But it seems like then his hidden behavior, that's his ostensible behavior, but his hidden behavior is in fact to comply with things that you're interested in, like he won't take piano lessons, but he knows how to play the piano. Or he will look like he's not being extraordinarily excellent at school, but how well does he do? I'll bet he does better than just passing, for example.
So, I mean, that's probably a good example, because we had put a lot of pressure on him. I think the pandemic didn't help when it went to all virtual, but now it's in person. We did have a lot of conversations. He is on the honor roll here, if you will, and he's very pleased with that. But also, I think it helped that we talked about it, but didn't put pressure on him like we had before. Like when we're pushing him hard to do it, it just comes back. Yeah. It swings the other way, right?
Well, some parents, for example, take a look at the expectations and the pressure on their children to perform. And some kids interpret that as a loss of freedom. And then they will come up with ways to feel freedom that's not real disobedient. It's just sort of contrariness or some sort of strange form of behavior. And you'll think, where does that come from? But it's a freedom-loving adolescency who's involved in that, because he's not disobedient or he's not anti. He's just saying, I'm going to demonstrate my freedom by not being stuff. And you mentioned where you've taken the pressure off where school is concerned, and now he might feel freer to do it on his own. So I would suggest to you that you get a piece of paper one day and make notes of where he's, let's say, is contrary a good word? I don't mean disobedient, but just invents some behavior that's different than. And then you say, all right, and make a list of those, and on the left-hand side of the paper, and then on the right side of the paper, identify what the two of you as parents think is socially acceptable or desirable for the two of you, and then start one by one and asking him to identify for himself what he would like to do in that situation. And if he wants to continue to be, exceptional in some way, there's nothing much wrong with that, except it might violate your sensibilities. But if it's an appropriate behavior, then okay, it'd be fine. We can use a lot of people in the world who are creative. Creative people tend to come up with things that sound weird to begin with, or their behavior is strange. And so he's actually demonstrating that, but it sounds like he's really bright and creative and willing to test, the social limits in some way. And he may just be communicating to you, I know what you want me to do. I'm going to do it eventually, but I'm going to be my own person, and I get a little fun out of this because I get to poke fun at the two of you while I'm doing it and demonstrate to you you can't control me entirely. So I would just say pick out some areas where you don't need to exert control and let him go. He sounds like a great young man to me, and I'll bet he is in your family.
We like him, and there's definitely something to do with that freedom. He does want that. He does push back to kind of keep the elbows come out when he feels like we're getting maybe a little too up in his business.
Well, we love our kids and we're very concerned about them, but there are a lot of parents who are so concerned and they may have a misapplication of their motivation, and the child feels robbed of his freedom. And then you're going to get some behavior, either excessive conformity, or you'll get two levels of behavior. The surface is nonconformity, and then I'm going to conform on the private level. But some kids will become anti-parents, and they're the ones that defeat themselves and hurt themselves along the way. But it doesn't sound like he's doing that much. If he starts sneaking out of his bedroom and spending times with gang members, you probably need to do something different than this, but you get the idea. He sounds like he's doing fine.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're also suggesting in terms of our original question about how to help him develop a clear vision for himself and his future, maybe that we should just back off of that a little bit.
You know what we forget in the world in which we live is that identity formation is a natural condition of the brain. It starts out unintegrated and becomes more integrated over time. And a lot of what we need to do as parents is to provide a safe and wholesome environment where kids have a chance to learn about themselves and the world, and their brain will put that together. See, I would be worried that if you look at him and you think, he doesn't have a vision for himself, that if you suggested that he needs one, he'd probably find a way to oppose that, and so on, because he's playing you just a little, and it may be all unconscious. But so I think I would let it go for a while, and I'll bet his brain just does fine. I'll bet he comes up with, and if he struggles with it one day, well, welcome to the club. Most of us don't have a real clear-cut vision for ourselves at 14. We're still wondering how to get a cute girl to like us, at 15 or 16. And if I can achieve that, then it's a victory for me, and so on. But I will back after listening to you that you have some plans for your family. You hope your children are following the plans, and he looks like he's just wandering around, messing around on the path. And the two of you are goal directed, and you say, hey, stop messing around and move it. But he's actually doing a lot of things that are consistent with what the two of you value. Yeah. And he's having fun, and he's poking fun at the same time. He might be one of your healthiest kids, in fact.
He's just that smart, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about your daughter. I've been waiting to talk about her.
Okay. So would you like to hear our overarching question first, I guess?
Yes. What's your question about this girl?
We would just like to have some help to help her be able to have confidence in herself socially and academically, and then also to help her be able to assume her responsibilities with more joy and enjoyment, maybe.
Okay, could I ask, is there anyone in your family, including the two of you, that have social anxiety of some kind? Is she learning that from somebody?
I would suggest I have social anxiety of some kind. I don't really enjoy being in large groups.
Or being recorded.
I absolutely do not like being recorded. That's just a fact.
So here is, all right, so she has some social anxiety, and she has less enjoyment with her life than you'd like her to. Do I understand that correctly?
Well, it's she, like, if like her school workload isn't extreme, right? But she doesn't she worries about it and frets about it, and then it becomes bigger and bigger, and then it explodes, and then she burrows into it, and while at the same time having an emotional, um, a very I don't know. She's just very emotional about it. It's there are tears and worries, and then eventually she makes up her mind, and then she just does it. And it's like, how do we get to the part where you just make up your mind to do it earlier, and then you don't have to have these worries that the procrastination compounds.
Would you happen to know if in your family anyone has an attentional disorder, a diagnosed attentional problem? Sometimes that distractibility and delay can be an example of a minor case of an attentional problem that kids inherit. But if it isn't, and if it's just a learned form of anxiety, then um, here are some things you can do to be of help to her. You can take a look at the overall emotional climate of your family and ask yourself how positive, warm, inviting, laughing, fun is it? Or how dedicated to get the work done are we? And if you're not doing enough joke telling, laughing, and having fun and kidding, you may want to pick that up and see what you can do about that. And you can also then give her an opportunity to learn a set of executive skills, one of which, and you do this in a small amount of time, a very small step, and you say, let's concentrate on just one thing this week. And it might be a time when she starts doing homework, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon or 4. And that's all she focuses on is just that one thing. You might give her an incentive that when she does that, she gets a new car, or I'm just joking about that, but something fun, that she would enjoy. Then I think you may need to create some actual enjoyment times with her and explain to her what it is. Because a lot of kids in the world we live in face an enormous amount of pressure, due dates at school, teachers' expectations, and girls especially. One of the blessings girls have is being sensitive to what other people think and their feelings. And that's a little bit of a curse for a teenage girl because they're sensitive to what other people think. And so they feel some pressure. So when you have excessive concern about other people, you tend to also be very self-critical. And then you're not as organized as possible. So one way out of this is to do 2 or 3 things at the same time. Small things, executive to just organize and manage time. The idea of helping her be more aware of her own thought process and her own feelings and acting on the basis of that instead of spending a lot of time being self-critical or worry about other people, and to find ways to have enjoyment periods. Kids are grim a lot of the time, which is that precedes often or is associated with the kind of pressure that they feel. It worries me. We often do not have any more where a child is lying on his or her back on the lawn, for example, and watching a cloud go from horizon to horizon. We just don't see that. They're busy with what the technology world has done to us, has made things fast. The emphasis on getting fast and getting it done and doing it more. And so it puts that kind of pressure on us. So if she were younger, a younger child, I suggest that when she goes about doing something, invite her to go slow. Just call her a period of time and say, let's do turtle for a minute. And you just do turtle. And while you're doing that, you're having fun. And then give her ways while she's working, like doing homework or so on, ways to have fun. There are many ways. So for example, monitoring herself, talking about how she's doing. I've got 3 pages to do. I've really had fun with that. I'm doing well. And teach her to be self-reinforcing. I'm doing great. I'm doing fine. Oh, got that. I'm sure this score is going to be good. And you teach some self-narration that has to do with positive. And then you create a family environment that has, make sure it's positive and fun.
Yeah.
A lot of our kids, we are holding them in a very stressful environment, which is the root cause typically of the anxiety. And then when they get exhausted and tired, and then they don't do it, then they get behind and so on. Just make a rule that says, ask her to adopt a rule that she does what she's assigned that day and start at 3 and give her an incentive and see if she can control some part of her studies.
Yeah, that's really interesting about the self-narration, because I've noticed that she's already kind of seeking for a way to do that. Like because she feels these negative emotions so strongly whenever she's asked to do something uncomfortable. And she'll try to attribute those feelings to something other than herself. And she'll sometimes just walk around saying, I don't know, trying to explain her own behavior to herself. And on one occasion I said, I think it would be okay if you just say, I don't want to do this thing, And then you don't have to be looking around at trying to find justification that your negative feelings are not sourced from you.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Sure. Then do that and sometime, and then also ask her to restate those self-narrated words. I believe I can solve this. I think if I think about it, I'll be okay. And just ask her to start repeating the affirmative side of that so that she gives herself credit and confidence. Because when you face a social situation, you tell yourself, oh, well, this is going to work out well, or gee, I don't know what will happen, or it's not going to work out well. And most of the time we want them to have an affirmative, it's going to work out well. And you can practice that. You could demonstrate it yourselves and to your whole family. Well, listen, our time is gone. And I want to thank you. You've been wonderful and helpful to a lot of people, I'm sure, who will listen to this. And good luck with your kids. Sounds like you have a wonderful family.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you're interested in having a conversation with Dr. Scoresby about your teenager and having it used on our podcast for the benefit of other parents who might be facing something similar, please contact us on mattersmostmedia.org or message Do What Matters Most on Facebook. Thank you for listening to this episode of Do What Matters Most, which is sponsored by FirstAnswers.com, where you can find new tools for families and parents of 21st century kids with a focus on emotional self-reliance. Visit FirstAnswers.com to sign up for a free newsletter. Find Do What Matters Most on Facebook and our website, mattersmostmedia.org, where you can ask Dr. Scoresby your own questions. Remember to subscribe to stay up to date with new episodes. Give us a rating and write a review on the podcast app or Google Podcasts, and let us know what you think about Do What Matters Most.